All right. Well, hello, hello. We're back again for another Othering Thursday, and I am joined once again on the roughly 1 year anniversary of doing these things, Tristan, by Tristan Zimmerman of Molten Sulfur Press and the Molten Sulfur blog. And we're going to talk about some weird history, like we do.
Yeah, like we do. We've been doing this for a hot minute now. It's always a lot of fun, and I am excited to get rolling.
That weird history. Sometimes it's weird history, but it's gameable history. That's the
Exactly.
that's the piece that's the piece that we're here to talk about.
Yeah, the central premise kind of being that if you take something from real history, or as one of the things we might talk about today, real folklore, and just kind of file the serial numbers off of it and drop it into the campaign you're already running, it will be richer, it will be more vibrant, it will be more alive than something that you just invented out of whole cloth.
Like
And
the Lebwitch. It's totally the Lebwitch.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's not the Bell Witch. That'd be wild. No, LLEB, the Yeb Witch.
That's right.
Uh,
It's right. It takes place in what I don't know, south of the border, I was going to say. Anyway, I don't even know if you're going to talk about that first. Like, what do you want to talk about first?
yeah, so
I like to see the future, but what's the present?
I would say let's do the expulsion of the Jesuit order from Mexico back in lovely 1767.
1767. All right, I'm putting my mind, putting the, you know, zooming in on the mental timeline to 1767.
Yeah, so at the time, Mexico was part of New Spain. It was part of Spain's colonial dominions in South America, and at this point also in North America, because Spanish New Mexico extended very far north into lands that are, today California and so forth. Um, and one of the organizations operating in Mexico at that time is a Catholic religious order called the Jesuit order. Technically, the standard English language translation of their official Latin name is the Society of Jesus. But actually, I didn't even intend this. This is a great segue to talking about who they are, because I disagree with that translation. I think it's not a good translation because,
I mean, it's the one
well,
I've heard my whole life, yeah,
yeah,
Society of
well,
Jesus, right? The Jesuits, that makes sense.
yeah. The word that is translated as society is a Latin word that I'm not going to try to pronounce, that is a cognate with the English society. And it's a true cognate, right? Like they are etymologically related. But what it means in Latin is less like society and more company. Not in the sense of a mercantile endeavor, in the sense of a military organization, the
Mm.
company of Jesus. And that's because the Jesuits' founder, 1540, Ignatius of Loyola, or just Ignatius Loyola. Ignatius Loyola was a soldier who organized his new religious order according to principles of military discipline. Um, and the Jesuits focused and continue to focus. They're very much an active organization today. But their primary focus was and remains proselytization, so converting people to Catholic Christianity, and education. Jesuits are deeply involved in education. In order to be a Jesuit today, you need to hold two PhDs. One needs to be in divinity, and the other is in something else. So Jesuits
Wow.
are super overeducated. They're deeply involved in running educational things. The place that I went to grad school is a university run by the Jesuit order. Um, and and so they're big into proselytization, they're big into education, they're big into organization, right? Following the rules,
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
what you're
yeah.
told, discipline.
That's
And
literally the order. Like that's the order that they're.
Yeah. And they are pretty unusual in the Catholic hierarchy, and were even more unusual in the time period that we're going to be talking about, in that they don't report to the local Catholic hierarchy. They report to the Pope. The Jesuit order reports directly to the Pope, the head of the Catholic religion. Um, and this is very different from how most Catholic religious organizations, most clergy operate, where you are subordinate to, you report to your local bishop. And there's this whole, chain of organization, and bishops have kind of local organizational powers. But if you have a Jesuit somewhere, they exist outside that chain of command. They have their own chain of command, which goes directly to the Pope. And this has meant that at many points in history, Jesuits have operated as kind of the standard phrase is the bulldogs of the Pope, where the Pope says, hey, there's something that I need done over in this area, but for whatever reason, I can't count on the local bishops to get it
Right.
done. So I'm going to send some Jesuits to do it because aren't beholden to local political apparatuses.
I mean, I just suppose it's beyond the scope of this conversation to ask how this came about in the first place. But like, is that sort of? I mean, this is the era of Counter-Reformation, and like, did the Pope feel that they needed a bunch of bulldogs, or
So
was this sort of like accidental because Ignatius knew who to ask, how to set it, like,
It was kind of none of these things. You're entirely right about the Jesuit order being born out of the Counter-Reformation, right? And there's a bunch of Catholic religious orders that remain very important to this day that are kind of born out of this. Oh my God, people are leaving the Catholic Church, they're converting to Protestantism. Um, Clearly, we have done something wrong to lose people's trust. Let's throw a bunch of things at the wall and see what
yeah,
sticks. And one of these things is the Jesuit order. Ignatius Loyola, when he so first he starts his order, then he asks permission to start his
mm,
order,
mm, mm.
and as part of the please papacy, can I do a religious order? Part of that was, and we're going to report directly to you. It was not something where the Pope commissioned this to happen. It was not the result, as far as I'm aware, of him having deep political connections to the papacy. Like this was just part of his idea of what he wanted his company of Jesus to be. But for the purposes of 1767 Mexico, this all actually really matters because um, the colonial administration of New Spain and the Catholic Church in New Spain are not really separate entities. The local administrators, the governors, the viceroys, and the local bishops are working absolutely hand in glove. And this is not necessarily totally unique in this time. There's lots of places. A classic example is that in the Holy Roman Empire during this period, you have bishops who are running independent like principalities in the Holy Roman Empire, and the bishop is also the basically the mayor or the duke or whatever you want to call him.
Right, like,
So
head of state or,
yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
so the clergy and the administration are, in a very real sense, kind of almost the same thing. Um, or at least so hand in glove that the two cannot be disentangled. But the
I mean, I'm
Jesuits,
thinking about, I don't know if this is literally true, but I'm easily imagining like places out in California where you've got like the mission on one side of the street and the Presidio on the other side of the
mhm.
street. And those are like, that's the start of the town or the start of the colonial era town is those two institutions are right there at the same, across
Yes,
the same courtyard from each other,
and government administration is often run through the parishes and like yeah, but the Jesuits of course exist outside of this framework because they report to the Pope,
Right.
which means that you have this entire um religious order, but like an exceptionally well disciplined, well organized group of folks who do not report to the King of Spain, right? I mean, they do in that they are Spanish subjects, so they are obliged to follow his instructions, but it's it's an entire major organization going on here throughout the Spanish Empire that really is taking its orders from Rome, and this is making the King of Spain uncomfortable. And this is not unique. All throughout Europe during this period, so the Jesuit order has existed for about 200 years at this point, and all throughout Europe, there's a lot of Catholic monarchs who are starting to get uncomfortable with the Jesuits, and they're like, this is a period where kind of nationalization is taking over. These old medieval kingdoms are becoming nations or states as we would understand the concept today. And the
Well, and the
idea,
absolute monarchy as well, like the absolutism of, the Sun King and all that. I mean, that's not, you're at this same period, like it's just before this that is sort of like, not only are we going to be the nation of France, I'm also going to be the supreme ruler of,
mhm.
like, that kind of a thing. So,
So you've got all of these rulers that are starting to get uncomfortable with the idea of the Jesuit order, not because, as far as I can tell, they were actually doing anything to undermine the royal order. As far as I can tell, they weren't actually doing anything that any of these kings didn't like, but the fear was they could, if they
mhm.
really wanted to, they could cause trouble. And so different Catholic monarchies are kind of one by one expelling the Jesuits from their borders. And this is about the expulsion of the Jesuits from Spain and specifically from Mexico, which I think is kind of this really, really interesting case study. Um, Now, in Mexico, the Jesuits are, in many ways, even more powerful, even more influential than they are in other parts of the Catholic world. Um, you talked about the missions. Very often, on kind of the edges of Spanish control, um, the the Spanish presence could, in many cases, just be a single Jesuit priest running their own mission. So who knows what he might be getting up to out there? Like what he's doing is he's converting people. Like this is the thing
And
that you, the Spanish monarchy, said you wanted to happen, but he who knows what he's up to out there.
maybe some light mining or something like that. He could be getting rich out there, that guy.
Yeah, or he could be fomenting local unrest or telling people to not pay attention to the king or something. But the point is, there's no checks on what many of these evangelists are doing out on the edges of Spanish control. And of course, what Spain claims is substantially larger than what Spain actually controls, right? For on towards the edges of the empire, what you have is a lot of native nations who are living more or less free of Spanish dominion at this point. But the other way that the Jesuits are unusually powerful in Mexico is I've mentioned Jesuits really into education. So a lot of Jesuit priests are working as tutors. And who can afford a tutor? Why, the rich.
Mhm.
So if a Jesuit priest is spending a lot of time in the home of a rich family because the priest is educating their children, then kind of necessarily because of how humans work, like they are befriending these very rich and powerful people, and they are molding young minds. And a lot of the sons of the rich are going off to become Jesuits because Father Pio was a cool dude, and I liked and respected him, so now I'm going to go become a Jesuit. And
Right.
um,
And I'm a third son, and that's just what you do. You've got, if you're not the first son and you're not going to inherit the land, then you've got to you find another place to make a living.
so King Carlos III wants the Jesuits gone. But he wants them gone, gone. He doesn't want to just like say, okay, it's now illegal to be a Jesuit because then, well, they're just gonna keep doing what they're doing, but they'll do it underground. And he doesn't want that. He is legitimately very afraid that they might be up to unspecified no goodery. Um, and so he decides he's going to do this in a very organized fashion. So let me make sure I get the dates right. Yeah. So on February 27th, 1767, he sends out sealed orders to his administrators all across the Spanish Empire. And on these letters, it says, do not open me before nightfall on April 2nd, on pain of death. If you open this sealed letter before nightfall on April 2nd, I, Carlos III, will see to it that you are executed. So nobody knows that there's about to be this big roundup of all the Jesuits to arrest them, throw them in jail, and ultimately deport them to. At this point, I'm not even sure if Carlos knows, though it winds up being to, I want to say to Corsica. Um, so this all goes off quite successfully in mainland Spain, right? It works, right? Nobody knows this is coming. Everybody unseals the orders at the same time. They say, okay, well, go get me some soldiers because we're going to be working through the night, I guess. But of course, the order says don't unseal before April 2nd. That's basically a month. It's slightly more than a month for the letters to get everywhere. This is 1767. It takes more than a month for a letter to cross the Atlantic to get to Mexico. So by the time the letters arrive in Mexico, it's May. But the only person who knows is the Viceroy of Mexico, the Marquis de Croix, a Frenchman by birth. So the Marquis de Croix opens this letter, and he is now the only person in Mexico who knows that he is supposed to round up and expel all the Jesuits from Mexico. Um, and he has instructions to do basically the same thing that Carlos III did in Spain. Send out sealed messages, do it all on the same evening, get them all. Of course, he does need. Oh,
Well, I was just thinking, I'm just working out like I can't. New Spain, i.e. Mexico, that's like bigger than Spain, right? I mean,
oh yeah,
this is not an easy, this will not be an easy job. Um,
yes. Um, so he brings in. So he needs assistance, right? He can't do this all on his. He can't. I think a good word to use here is conspiracy, right? Like even though it's
mm.
being done by the people who are, it's being done by the state, but like it's still a conspiracy because as few people can know as possible, blah blah blah. So he needs to let a couple of people in on the conspiracy. He lets his nephew know. Cool. But he also lets in this really interesting guy, his right-hand man, a guy named José de Gálvez. Um, José de Gálvez is ostensibly in Mexico to serve as the royal auditor. He is there as a check on the viceroy's power, right? The Marquis de Croix. José de Gálvez is supposed to be there to be the guy looking over his shoulder and saying, I'm not sure the king would want you to do that.
Mm.
In the Hunt for the Red October, José de Gálvez would be the Soviet political officer. Um, but
Is he the
he's a
guy that slips on his tea in like the first scene of that movie,
I think
basically?
so, yeah.
Or the second scene of that movie?
Um, but he's this really interesting figure because he was not the Spanish Empire during this period, especially kind of in the 1760s. There will be some change ups in the 1770s. The Spanish Empire is profoundly aristocratically hidebound,
Mm.
right? You can't advance in any sort of government. You can't be part of any sort of government unless you can trace your family's aristocratic lineage back so many, centuries or whatever. Like only fancy lads whose great 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 grandfathers were fancy lads are allowed to have anything to do with government. Um, but um,
I mean,
but
uh, that's like the reason for adventuring in the New World in the first place, right? I mean, is all these people who weren't quite fancy enough came over here to big up their reputations, right? I mean, that's
certainly the case that a lot of conquistadors, including really influential, important figures, were second sons. They were hidalgos. They were people who expected who had a lineage but no lands, no wealth, no
Mm.
expectations of a
So the
future.
other way around. Okay.
Um, but Jose de Galvez was born a farmer. Um, and while he was like his family was well off as far as farmers go, but like not not aristocrats. So while he's in school as a child, a bishop comes through, like, just doing a quick inspection. Hey, let's see what's going on in the school, and observes that Jose is brilliant. The man is legitimately, or the child is a genius. And the bishop is like, okay, you're special. And he pays to have Jose educated as a lawyer. So now he's a lawyer. He moves to Madrid. He puts out his shingle, a new lawyer in Madrid. And while working in Madrid as a very effective lawyer, because again, I cannot stress enough, brilliant, he marries a relative of the ambassador of France, right? The French ambassador to Spain. And this is a marriage that's kind of like he really married up, but it's not like mind-bogglingly up. And she then is able to, go up above her station, but not mind-bogglingly so, in order to get Gálvez a position in the government. So, and he then becomes Jose de Gálvez. He gets a nominal title to go along with it. And the first thing he does is he says, okay, now that I'm on the inside of this system, I'm buying officers' commissions in the army for all of my male relatives. I got up here, I'm dragging all my entire family with me up into the upper class. And
That's how it works.
because Galvez doesn't have a, most of the people in government, because they're fancy lads, they have estates to return to. They have luxurious lives that they can enjoy if this whole government thing doesn't work out. So they're not volunteering to do arduous assignments, right? But Galvez doesn't have any of that to fall back upon. So he's always first in line to volunteer for the really hard, unpleasant jobs. And in so doing, he's just rocketing up the ranks because he is putting himself in situations that A, people now owe him a favor for, taking on this job, and B, he has an opportunity to show off, oh shit, this guy's really good at his job.
And I suppose that's how he ends up in New Spain.
And that's exactly how he winds up in New Spain, because the guy who was supposed to be the auditor to the viceroy does not want to do it. And Galvez puts up his hand and says, I'll do it. I'll take a dangerous voyage across the ocean. I'll have the job as the auditor where you have to be traveling, you have to be on the road constantly. I'll take it. And so he shows up in New Spain, and there's a viceroy there, not the Marquis de Croix, the previous viceroy. And this guy, as it turns out, has been lying to the crown the whole time about what conditions in Mexico are like. And so Galvez is just like, hey, I'm your checks and your balances. I'm writing
Uh-huh.
back to New Spain. And I'm writing back to Madrid. And the viceroy is very quickly recalled. And a new guy is sent out, the Marquis de Croix, who Galvez knew that the Marquis de Croix was next in line to be viceroy, right? So Galvez, being a smart guy, went ahead and preemptively established a political alliance with the Marquis de Croix before he left Madrid. So now his political ally is here, and even though they're supposed to be like the viceroy and the guy watching over the viceroy's shoulder, two peas in a pod, right? They are besties. So of course Galvez is one of the people that the viceroy lets in on, like, hey man, you're like really good at things. How are we going to pull off this nighttime countrywide arrest order? And so what these three men, the Marquis de Croix, the Marquis's nephew, and Jose de Galvez, wind up doing is they send sealed orders. Again, do not open on pain of death before such and such a date. June 24th, 1767. Send them out across Mexico. Um, and but they and when the orders are unsealed, all the local administrators are like, guess I better go arrest all the Jesuits. Um, the trio here at the top, they anticipate that there's likely to be trouble because the Jesuits are very popular. In addition to being very well placed, among the native nations and among the rich. The Jesuits also have a reputation for treating the poor with significantly more compassion than the rest of the clergy does. So they're very popular with the poor. And this trio is worried, like, hey, there might be riots when word gets out. So they recall the army. They call the army back from the borders and they station the army in Puebla and in Mexico City, ready to put down any riots. And when everybody unseals their orders, all across Mexico City, the army goes out and rounds up all the Jesuits in the boonies. Local administrators are like, oh, and they send riders out to ride through the nights through the night to visit all the various missions and arrest the Jesuits there. Um, there and it all kind of goes off a little bit without a hitch, which is wild because, like you said, like this is huge. This is so much territory. There are some riots. There are some riots in the mining districts, and Gálvez, the viceroy, sends Gálvez out to deal with the riots. Gálvez hangs 80 rebels, has hundreds more condemned to the mines. That sure deals with the riots.
I
Um,
guess.
and all these arrested Jesuits are transported to the port of Veracruz and then sent back to Spain to be sent onwards for further exile. Um, it was unpopular. Mexico was already in a bit of a state of unrest. This action kind of intensifies the unrest, but it works, right? They pull it off. Um, one other detail that I neglected to mention that's really relevant here is another motivation for wanting the Jesuits out. The Jesuits control a lot of property. And if the Jesuit order is expelled, then the
Right.
crown gets to take over all that property.
Sure,
And
sure.
that's a big cash influx.
Uh,
So,
that's that's uh that's these sort of actions have happened throughout history, and that's often a
yeah,
component.
yeah. So yeah, I mean the expulsion of the Jesuits from Mexico is successful in that it certainly accomplishes its aims. There wind up being further Jesuit expulsions in Europe. In the Philippines, because of course Spain controls the Philippines during this era. The sealed letter doesn't arrive in the Philippines until a full year after it was sent from Spain, which I think is amazing. Um, but yeah, further expulsions in Europe in 1773, Pope Clement XIV just dissolves the entire Jesuit order. He is working to try to restore good relations with the Catholic monarchs of Europe. The Catholic monarchs of Europe do not like the Jesuits, so the Pope is just like, "Yep, order dissolved. No more Jesuits." But it doesn't stick. The order is restored in 1814. The Jesuit order continues to this day. But from a gaming perspective, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many elements to pick up on, but what are some of your, because like, okay, so we spent a lot of time talking about Galvez, so it's like you've got to have the genius mastermind who's going to pull off the plot, right? You've got to have the conditions, you've got to have I mean, you're putting this scenario into your own
Yeah, yeah.
campaign, right?
Filing
What
off the
are
serial
the
numbers and dropping it right in.
Right, I mean, what are the some sort of order, all of those things, right? The independent, what is an independent order that still has a lot of power and influence, but isn't quite like part of the power structure, like that's something to set up. And then like, what are the responses to the people? Like when you were talking about actually successfully going around and arresting the people in the hinterlands and stuff like that, it's like, were they like had a big rolling jail cage chariot thing? Like how did they actually like what are the because that's like the players like if in your campaign like they're not necessarily you could play a game where they're in the halls of power that are making the negotiations, but you could also have them like here comes the wagon to arrest all of the people, a very street level version of this event, like what are the actual mechanics of going and
So,
arresting priests out on in the hinterland, I
so out in the hinterlands, my guess would be dude shows up with some soldiers, everybody's on horseback, they bring extra horses with them,
yeah
and hello, father, we're going to bind your hands. We're going to put you up on this horse. And getting off a horse with your hands bound, I'm sure is interesting. But B, like, we have weapons you don't like. Please don't make this hard.
right
Um, But for involving the PCs, the way I would do it, my favorite thing of this whole story, and there's so much that I love about this story, but my favorite thing is those sealed messages.
Mm.
So the players are out doing their adventurer thing, and they stumble across one of the messengers carrying one of these sealed messages. But she's had a heart attack, right? The scout ship that she's piloting lost life support. And there's this message that's sealed and says on it, on pain of death, do not open before, a date that is 2 weeks in the future. Man, I have never met a player who won't open that sealed message, right? Like that is a dream.
I'm
Um,
immediately making my computer operation skills so that I can read that message now, from the scout ship memory
exactly.
banks, you know.
And and then you learn, oh my God, this order, and it doesn't have to be a religious order, right? But this organization is going to be rounded up and arrested and expelled and exiled on such and such date 2 weeks in the future. Um, Great. What are you going to do about it? Because now you're involved, whether you want to be involved. If like that's it.
Yeah.
The computer has logged that someone has accessed it. The seal is broken. Even if you
Well,
burn the message, like, hey, here's this dead messenger. Where's his message? Like, you're involved.
yeah, it's the classic call to adventure thing. Like you could just be like, well, we don't know them. That's fine, but then that's,
But
you
the
know, that
adventure's still going to find you.
right, right, right. I mean, that's, these events will unfurl, whether you're directly involved or not.
And so I think a lot about how this is going to unfurl is going to have to do with how your players and their characters feel about the organization that you're using to take the place of the Jesuits, right?
Mm,
So my recommendation there is if you, I mean, obviously if you have an organization, in a fantasy game, this might be, the Church of Paylor or whatever. If you have an organization that's already an established part of the setting and the players know about it, cool, like you're done. You use that, and however they feel about that organization is how they feel about it. If you don't have such an organization that you want to target in your fiction that way, then my recommendation is a session or two before you drop this message in the character's laps. Go ahead and introduce the organization, right? Have them meet a member of the organization. Maybe that person is a dick. Maybe that person is really cool. Just kind of give them some strong character traits so that the players form an opinion. And maybe that opinion will be positive, and maybe that will be negative, and maybe you can't see it coming which way it's going to be. But like, give them a reason to form a strong opinion. Maybe they need hospitality, and a church belonging to this organization is like, yes, absolutely, come in. We'll do you a solid. But a session or two before, introduce the organization that you're going to use and give the players, not just the characters, but also the players, an emotional attachment to them, for good or for ill. And then when the message falls in their hands, um, okay, what do you do with this, right? Do you ride hell for leather to the nearest representative of this organization and thrust the letter into their hands and say, watch out, they're coming for you in 2 weeks, go underground now? Do you say, you know what? We also don't like this organization. We're going to, oh no, the recipient of this letter now won't get it, and maybe the organization will manage to escape. So we're going to ride hell for leather to the local administrator and press the message into their hands and say, look, we're so sorry we read it. Like, please don't execute us, but like, we're on your side. Um, and from there, things can unfold organically, and whatever happens, happens, which is my absolute favorite way to have plots go in role-playing games.
excellent. Uh, we've covered that one pretty thoroughly, I think.
Yes, yes, I may
Which
have
is,
gone into more detail than I needed to.
it's the journey is always the pleasure, but I do want to, I think it's good. It's good. And of course, all of these links, for you watching the video, like links back to the original blog post will be there. You can get some more details. In this case, maybe not more details because like you
In
did
most
have some,
cases, fewer details, honestly. I went into more detail than is present in the blog post.
but I mean, I think there are some other ideas about the character side of it. But all this, now I'm taking up too much time. we should move on to the other topic that you have prepared for us today, Tristan, because it's not quite the same. There's there's sort of a resonance, I think, maybe a little bit, but not exactly. I don't know. Maybe there's less story here, and it doesn't matter that we've talked so long on the first one. But
Well, we'll see. So this story, now we transport ourselves 50 years in the future and across the Gulf of Mexico, 1817, Robertson County, Tennessee, kind of just north of Nashville, Middle Tennessee. Um, Middle Tennessee is starting to come to the end of its frontier period, but not quite yet. There's still definitely a frontier element to society here. And we're going to be talking about a classic, creepy piece of Tennessee folklore, the Bell Witch. Um, and I think the Bell Witch is fabulously gameable, not least because she's probably not a witch. One of the things that is present in a lot of kind of Tennessee folklore, southeastern Appalachia folklore, or southern Appalachia folklore, is that definitions are often fluid and loose, and I think that's really really fun. So we'll dive into this. So the Bell Witch, the Bell family is a well-off farmer family in Tennessee. They have a nice two-story house. They own several enslaved black laborers. They are, they are doing all right for themselves. Obviously, their enslaved laborers are doing less well for themselves. Um, and around 1817, they start the bells start seeing weird things, right? They see a big black animal that's of a kind that nobody's seen before and doesn't seem to have any fear of humans. They see a big bird of a kind that nobody's seen before. They see a pretty girl in a green dress playing by swinging on a rope, and nobody knows who this girl is, and then she disappears. And then at night they start being kept awake by rapping and scratching and the sounds of like animals gnawing and somebody like sucking on their teeth and smacking their lips, but there's no their sheets are yanked off them, their hair is
right.
pulled, pins are stuck into their body.
All right. That's gone beyond like because I was like animals chewing on stuff and seeing things in the woods. Like this is very like, edge of European colonial society. Like I had you seen a bear before? That's a big black creature that's in the woods that you may not have known what that is. Like I don't know.
But
But
it
then
it quickly escalates to poltergeist
yeah,
territory.
pin sheets pulling off and like because I had a woodchuck under my kitchen floor. Like it makes a bunch of chewing sounds and, it's you just like just leave, please leave. You stamp on the floor, all those things. But like anyway, yes, sheets pulling off. Not that is not a woodchuck anymore.
Yeah. And this being, whatever it is. Oh, I should mention at this point that we have some sources for this story kind of dating closer to when the story happens. But the real like definitive edition that kids in Tennessee are told today comes from an 1894 book called An Authenticated History of the Famous Bell Witch. It is not authenticated. We have very good reason to suspect that the author M.V. Ingram fabricated most of his sources.
Would you have to put authenticated in the title? Maybe it's not for real. You're
So yeah, yeah.
you just
So
you're trying too hard.
we are just for the purposes of this YouTube video, we are going to pretend that the Ingram story is true because it is a lot easier than saying over and over again. And then Ingram claimed that
Well,
the spirit pulled their hair, right?
and
Um,
also it's like this is the story. This is the
yeah,
story
yeah.
that
This
you'd
is
be
the
using,
story.
so this is the story.
So whatever this silent spirit is, well, not silent, but like not talking, um, it particularly targets two members of the family, the father, John Bell Sr., and his daughter Betsy. And Betsy's kind of the favorite, right? Everybody loves Betsy. She's beautiful, she's outgoing, right? And the whatever this is really has it in for these two in particular, and just like frequently beats them up. Um, and
That is real
the
poltergeist behavior.
yeah, yeah. And the bells, the Bell family kind of figures out that whatever the spirit is, it can understand their speech. Because when they speak to it, it like stops what it's doing. And then very often, once you finish speaking, it resumes what it's doing, but it's doing it like more intensely. And kind of around this time, the bells start getting visitors, right? People coming by to be like, hey, I heard about this thing. I'd like to see what's going on. And the visitors start interrogating the witch, and this is just what people are calling it. They're calling it the witch. And eventually, the witch kind of learns to communicate. First, it starts responding to questions by like rapping, one rap for yes, two raps for no. And then it starts whistling, and finally, it starts to speak. After a long period of training, it starts to speak. It speaks in kind of this low whisper. And then once it starts talking, it never wants to shut up again. And it's just forever saying things. It's always chit-chatting. It'll offer, prophecies like, oh, don't go on that trip. Nothing good will come of it. It seems to know everything that's happening in the entire county, including things that are happening simultaneous to the conversation it's having right now. Um, but its conversation always serves some malicious purpose. It seems to know about old quarrels that have long been settled, and it'll kind of work to flame those back up again. And it says hurtful things, it says mean things, and then it'll just beat the tar out of you, right? Um, and the witch at this point starts to offer explanations, right? Stories for what it is. And Ingram himself offers a bunch of like maybe it's a human sorceress, maybe it's a demon from hell, maybe like it is a natural being, right? Like this is just one of the living things that happens to live in Tennessee, just like, porcupines. Um maybe it's a soul that can't get into heaven or hell. And so the witch starts to offer up stories. So at one point it says, I am the spirit of someone, a native person who was buried in the woods nearby, and the grave was disturbed, and recounts, a story that, that according to Ingram actually happened, where one of the kids, one of the Bell kids, dug up a native grave and brought home the jawbone, which is rude, and throws the jawbone as hard as he can at the floor, at the wall of the cabin. Again, rude.
Yeah.
Um, and many of the teeth fall out. And when the father comes home, he's like, "Okay, you can't do this. Like this is desecration of a body." He gathers up all the bones and teeth, but and reburies them. But one of the teeth kind of rolled between the floorboards and was, but anyway, that's why I, the Bell Witch, am so mad, because you still have my tooth, but they tear up the floorboards and no tooth is found. And then the witch makes fun of them, like, "Ha, you believed me? What a bunch of suckers." Um, obviously I was lying.
Yeah, there's so much to respond to. Like this is like I know we like this is the story, right? So like just accept the story as the story. But there's like what wild like self-own sort of like storytelling like these it's just a weird it's a weird story to like have that sort of
Yes.
mockery and stuff like that. Um and of course again we don't need to talk about the whole textual history or whatever of the events and stuff like that, but like these things are getting written down what like 70 years or 60 years after they happened,
Mhm.
right? So I mean these are stories of stories at that point,
And again, Ingram is pretty obviously doing more than just like recounting what he has heard. He is writing a book that he intends that will sell.
yeah.
And he's correct. It does. It sells very well. So while he may be starting, he almost certainly is starting from a base of genuine oral transmission folklore.
Yeah.
He is definitely spinning his own yarn. But that yarn is so good, and again, it does have that connection to a genuine folktale. that the intentionally constructed yarn then goes on to become itself a folk story,
Right.
orally transmitted, evolving as it's told, which I think is really fun.
Yeah, I mean I mean obviously the name comes from the name of the family, but then like the witch character in the story is so much more prevalent, right? Like
Yes.
outsmarting the people, like the people don't even matter necessarily, right? The
Yeah, it
witch
could have been
becomes the
anybody.
center, the almost the witch becomes the protagonist of the story
Yeah.
because it's all of the stories being told about it are like how clever the or how not necessarily clever, but like the ability to manipulate the people in the situation, you know.
Yes.
And I'm sure that goes on with the like the cavalcade of people who come to like check out the witch and all get beat in the night by the
Yeah. Yeah. The witch just always remains the cleverest being in the room. Um, and she offers a bunch of other explanations. One of my favorites is, oh, I'm somebody who died and I buried a bunch of money and I want the money to go to Betsy, so I will tell you where my money was buried. And she tells them, and of course it's under this incredibly big, heavy stone. And oh, the treasure hunters, they go out and they spend all day laboriously working, and of course there's no treasure under there. And they come home and the witch is like, ah, you fell for it, you suckers. And then like tells them like, and this is what you were doing. And she says it in a silly voice to mock them. And at one point she claims to be the spirit of a woman named Kate Batts. Kate Batts, the real Kate Batts, was a nice eccentric woman who had the misfortune of her husband being quite insane. So she had to care for him. She had to look after him. And because of her misfortunes, people often shunned her, right? She wasn't necessarily an accepted part of the community because she had that taint on her. And so the witch pretends to be Kate Batts, and everyone's like, you know, I don't trust Kate Batts for no particular reason, so that sounds right. And the witch later says, "Ha, you idiots! I'm not Kate Batts." But by that point, the name Kate had already stuck, and kind of from then on in the story, everybody just always calls the witch Kate, which is, I think, just kind of a way for the witch to continue to torment Kate Batts, who has done nothing wrong, but this is a malicious entity that has found a way to torment another person
yeah.
by kind of just passing along this idea that everybody just unthinkingly runs with.
Is it local? You mentioned that like the witch seems to know everything that's happening in the region. But are there, or the appearances localized to like the Bell residence, or is this like, are
The
there other people who claim to have like talked to the witch out in the woods or a valley over, or wherever Kate Batts was living? Like, is there, or is it really focused on
the
the central
vast
location?
majority the vast majority of which like sightings are in the Bell residence. That said, there are other people who have Bell Witch stories, um, kind of in the lands around, though restricted kind of to Reynolds County. The witch sometimes claims knowledge of events that happen as far away as the Atlantic coast. And then, the story is that, oh, her predictions are always correct. She knew the thing. But the stories of, yeah, and then the witch started doing bad things seem to be restricted kind of to the county line.
It's interesting. Um,
Um, but you had mentioned people like investigators come, right?
oh yeah, yeah.
Investigators come to investigate the witch.
Like
Um,
this who's who
yeah,
interesting personages.
so like at one point a detective shows up, he's going to debunk the witch, and Kate just like stays silent the whole time until nightfall. And then once night falls and he's staying in the Bell house, then of course she beats him up. She just beats the tar out of him until someone manages to strike a light and light a candle. And he just holds on to the candle. For whatever reason, she won't do anything in the candlelight, at least in this specific instance. And so he just like stays up all night clutching the candle and waiting until morning and then flees. A self-proclaimed wizard comes to investigate her, a Dr. Mize from Kentucky. And Dr. Mize spends 4 days kind of puttering around the Bell House, casting spells and doing stuff. And Kate stays silent. And then at the end of the 4 days, she just strikes up an idle conversation with him. And in the course of the conversation, she reveals that she has such a depth of sorceress knowledge that Dr. Mize just flees in terror. She doesn't even have to beat him up. It's just like, oh, she knows too much. And then the one my in-laws are from this area, and so the Bell Witch story that was my introduction to the Bell Witch story was the time that Andrew Jackson goes to visit the Bell Witch. At this point, General Andrew Jackson is the hero of the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812. He's not yet President Andrew Jackson, but he will be. Um, and he's a very rich man. He has all these friends and hangers-on, and they're going to go visit the famous Bell Witch. And they bring with them a witch slayer who has a horse pistol with a silver ball loaded in it. Um, and when they cross over into her territory, the witch kind of grabs hold of their wagon and won't let it move until Andrew Jackson admits, like, "Ooh, you're very clearly a powerful witch." And then at that point, she, now that her power has been acknowledged, she releases the wagon so it can continue moving. And then when the party makes camp, they don't get all the way to the Bell House that night, so they have to spend the night in the woods. The witch visits them again and is talking to them, and the witch slayer shoots his horse pistol at the place where Kate's voice is coming from, but of course nothing happened. No, not nothing happens. The gun doesn't go off, right? He tries to shoot, but the gun doesn't go off. And then, surprise, surprise, she beats the tar out of him. She beats up the witch slayer. The witch slayer runs away, and Jackson is so spooked that the next day his party goes back to Nashville. Um, and yeah. So like a bunch of people come out to try to investigate the witch, and it goes badly for all of them.
I mean,
Um,
this is, I think, my favorite part of your retelling of the story is this because you can just imagine again in the gaming context, right? Not to jump to the end, because you could tell us the end of the story of the Bell Witch, but like you've got a wizard and a witch slayer and a military hero and all these things. Like this is literally a D&D party. Like these this
yes, it is absolutely a D&D party.
So anyway, continue with your. Tell us how the apparitions ended. Like I don't know. What's
Uh,
the end of the story?
one
Yeah,
last
yeah.
trait of but you're right, I need to get to the end here, but one last trait of the Bell Witch that I want to mention is her physicality, right?
Mm,
Does she have a body
mm.
is kind of a big question, right? She's definitely able to beat the heck out of people, so she can manipulate the physical world. But like, is she a body who is invisible? Is she a disembodied voice? Again, the story provides no answers as to what she is, which is my favorite part of the whole story. But like, she is able to shake hands, which suggests that she has some sort of body, or I don't know, maybe they're just kind of gripping empty air and she's manipulating something. I don't know. She says that she will only shake hands with people she trusts, right? People that she is confident will not like grab her by the hand and not let her go. But also, she is a liar. So is that just if they had brought in someone, if somebody had tried to grab hold of her, would she have just been like, "Ha, you sucker, you fell for it"? Like, I don't know. Um, and one instance of her physicality, and she's seen in a number of guises throughout Reynolds County. A giant fish, a black dog with two heads or no head. Like, are these her body? Is there these forms she's taking? Are these just images she's projecting?
Hmm.
But one time she appears in the cabin of a man named William Porter and climbs into bed with him. And he can't see anything, but he can feel the space that she occupies when she kind of rolls up in his covers. So he picks her up. He picks up this bundle of blankets and walks to the fireplace to try to throw her in the fire. But as he walks, the bundle in his arms gets heavier and heavier and fouler smelling until he has to drop it. And he does not manage to throw it in the fire. So I think also the question of like, does this being have a body? Big
Right.
question. But the end of the story. Eventually, John Bell Sr. dies because of constantly getting beaten up, and also at one point, Kate puts poison in and his poisons him while he is sleeping. Puts poison in his mouth while he's sleeping, and so he dies as a result of all this terrible mistreatment. His son, John Bell Jr., develops epilepsy, and Betsy, poor Betsy, eventually calls off an engagement. She was going to be engaged to this guy, the Bell Witch, who, of course, beats up Betsy all the time while claiming that Betsy is her favorite. Um, the Bell Witch has always hated this match. Always been saying, you need to not marry this guy, you need to not marry this guy. And eventually Betsy does kind of call off the wedding. And once that happens, the Bell Witch says, I'm going to go away for a while, but I'll be back in 7 years, so y'all better watch out. Um, and then she's gone. And then this is in 1821. So after 4 years of torment, she disappears. Says she'll come back in 1828. She does, and when she comes back, the family ignores her. Clearly, whatever this being is, it thrives on attention. So we're not going to give it to her. Where it's just going to be like your annoying little brother, like just don't pay any attention to him. And she does all her old torments, but they do not give her attention. And after 2 weeks, she leaves for good and is never seen again. Um,
Such a wild story. Like I mean, it's like so much folklore, right? It is very like the thing with the hand. Like, I don't want anyone to like try to like I'll shake your hand if I trust you, but I won't touch you if I think you're trying to grab me. Like that's a very weird, fey, folklory sort of like bizarre rules, and then like it ends with a like, oh well, we just ignored you, and it's like a
and now you're
temper
gone.
tantrum thing kind of, and then the obviously it's one of those things, the association, like to try and rationalize, right, is sort of a fool's errand, I suppose. But like the fact that the death in the families and epilepsy and stress over all these things are like, are they, it's like the all of it's bound up together, right? Once all of those things were done with, then like the witch is gone. It's like it's a I don't know. It feels very like nearly able to be rationalized in some respects with like very general sort of, you know, psychic trauma sort of things, family trauma, generational trauma or whatever. But then also it's just wildly physical, like you say, like the idea that like, oh, I felt the witch get in the bed. I mean, that's like a classic of ghost stories and stuff like that, feeling the weight of the ghost in the bed with you or whatever. So. I don't know. It's fascinating story. Fascinating story.
Yeah, again, my favorite part of the whole thing is that, it seems to almost fit in to an established category, and we'll be like, oh yeah, poltergeist story. I know poltergeist stories. I know what's going on with that.
I've
But
read the
like,
poltergeist stat block. I know that we need to do
yeah,
XXX in this game to eliminate the poltergeist.
but she never quite matches up with any standard thing, right? And it's never clear what she is, and because that's not the point of the story, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think the easy way to insert the Bell Witch into your campaign is the players hear about the Bell Witch, right? Just like all these other people who are like, oh man, a witch, you say? A weird disembodied spirit? Maybe it's a demon from hell. Maybe it's an alien. Like, maybe it's a natural being. Like, I got to check this out.
Yeah.
And of course, the
I'm a
players will
famous ghost slayer. I'll go check it out myself, like
Yeah, and so the players, if like sprinkle in some like, hey, by the way, like other people have checked this out too, right? Like there was a wizard, there was a detective, there was a famous war hero, like cool. So it's got some backstory to it. It's got some heft when they show up. And um I would recommend and then the way to figure out what's going on and to defeat the Bell Witch is to figure out what the Bell Witch is, right? Like if once you know what it is, you can be like, oh yeah, salt defeats ghosts, so we can use salt. Holly or whatever defeats witches, so we'll use holly. The Bismillah defeats jinn, so we'll use that. Um, and um, but you can't let the Bell Witch know what you're doing. And that's a problem because the Bell Witch is all seeing.
Right.
So if you kind of discuss internally, or I don't know, maybe you would have to like leave the county, collect some data, leave the county, discuss what you're doing, come back into the county. But I don't know, you're
But the
interesting
Bell
with
Witch
Bell Witch. So
knows what's
maybe,
happening on the Atlantic coast. So
yeah,
like how
so
far
maybe
away do
that's
you
not
have
going
to
to
get?
work. Um, but yeah, like you have to figure out what she is, but you have to do it in the context where she knows what you're doing, she knows what experiments you're trying, and she's gonna mess with them. She's gonna because that is who she is as a being, is a malicious, cruel, and with a mean sense of humor. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I would do it is, hey, can you succeed where Dr. Mize and Andrew Jackson failed?
Indeed. Can you succeed where yeah. Well, yeah, I'm resisting the temptation to like continue to speculate about the actual original thing based on the story that is again impossible because you're telling me what is a summary of a book that was written after the event. Like there's too many gaps. It cannot be figured out from in this discussion. So as tempting as that is, it's just a really interesting story. Like like I was saying, it hits on so many things of folklore. It hits on like sort of the like place. I think place is a really interesting element of this thing. It's centered in this place. It's not like like a roving, like if you had like a beast of the woods or whatever that roams around and you're hunting the beast in the woods, whatever RPG, fantasy, heroic thing you're doing, like it might live in a forest or whatever, but this is very centered on this one family in their cabin, and that's very interesting. A bit
Yeah.
different than a lot of sort of I don't know, it feels a little bit different. It feels a little bit different.
And particularly given that it has a real hatred for two members of the family specifically,
Hmm.
also, serves to integrate it into give it that sense of place where it is a very particular haunting.
Yeah.
It is not just like, oh yeah, it is ghost number 235. Like, no, it is the Bell Witch. It is a haunting unto itself, very specific to this time, this place, this family.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. All right. Well, that's great.
We
Is
have
there anything?
definitely gone over.
Oh, I think yeah. We've talked for more than an hour. I'm sure. I'm sure. We usually do. We usually do. Any final thoughts? Anything final to say about the Bell Witch, or should we just want to do go right to the wrap up?
I guess one final thing that I will mention that is not necessarily specific to like, oh, if you use the Bell Witch, but just like a detail that's kind of broadly applicable, is how the Bell Witch learns to talk. I think
Oh
is
yeah,
very
yeah.
gameable, right? If you've got like a baby AI or an
Or
awakened spell.
or like a
Uh,
demon that came from hell. It's like, that like it doesn't know English, like it's been speaking abyssal for a million years or whatever.
And so kind of starting out with rapping and then moving on to whistling, or not even starting with rapping, but like starting off with like the torment pausing, and eventually it develops into language, I think is very gameable, right? I think that can be a lot of fun to put on a weird NPC that you were
It's
going to use anyway.
it's it's also not a million miles away from like the way Frankenstein's monster learns to speak, which is
Ooh.
interesting. Because Frankenstein's monster is just watches a farmhouse, like it's like, and he just observes the family in the farmhouse and like watches them speak and starts to imitate their voices, and then like, anyway, that's how, because he didn't, I don't know, like he didn't have a parent that taught him how to speak. He had to like watch a family in a farmhouse interacting, and that's how he learned to speak. But anyway,
That is very cool. I have not read Frankenstein, so that
uh,
that is a super neat detail.
yeah, it's I mean, I saw a play version of Frankenstein earlier in the season, so it's bit fresher in my mind before that for that. Anyway, All right, Tristan. This has been a pleasure as always. Give us a wrap up. Where can people find these entries if they want to read what they've just heard us talk about? If they want, perhaps a more ordered and focused form.
Less rambly all over the
Right.
place.
I won't interrupt the blog. You will only get Tristan on the blog. And what is the where can people find that? Where can people find you and your work and all that?
So if you head to moltensulfur.com, that's sulfur spelled with an F, the American spelling, then you will find my blog posts where once a month I take something really cool from real history and folklore and something worth learning about in its own right, and delve into it, and then show you how to file the serial numbers off of it and drop it into your the campaign you were already running. And then also at moltensulfur.com you can find links to where you can purchase my many of my tabletop role-playing games, including Shanty Hunters, a game about singing and collecting magical sea shanties in 1880. And then my day job is also working on a game called Nations and Cannons, which is a tabletop role-playing game about the American Revolutionary War. So you should check that out too.
That's right. That's right. I guess 18 or 1815 is a little too late for that, but some of those people are still kicking around. Have them go fight the Bell Witch.
Yeah! Have Thomas Jefferson, aged Thomas Jefferson, go fight the Bell Witch.
He'll have all kinds of theories, no doubt. Um, uh, all right. Thank you so much for doing this today with me, Tristan. And thank you to all the viewers. What's your favorite local legend? Put that in the comments. Maybe we'll perhaps there'll be a future episode about some of your local folklore. No promises, but it's always interesting to read what stories excite you. Um,
Absolutely, that sounds super fun.
yeah. All right. We will see you in the next one.
See you guys.